Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Strategy and Performance Scrutiny Board meeting. Hope we're all keeping well and have rested up after last night's full council meeting. We shall make a start. Substitutes nominated for this meeting and apologies for absence.
We've got Councillor Hutchinson for Councillor Sweeney, and I think that's all we've received so far tonight, Chair.
Right. Okay. Admission to, do any members have any disclosable pecuniary or any other interest which would prevent them from participating in any of the discussions of items or participating in any vote on the items in this meeting this evening? No. Okay. Admission to the public. We have no exempt items on this evening. So we are live already on YouTube. So members of the public are there already watching. Minutes of the Strategy and Performance Scrutiny Board meeting held on the 5th of August. Do we have someone to propose them as an accurate count? Councillor Naeem, do we have a seconder on that one? Councillor Lee, thank you very much. Okay. Right, we have 3 items on tonight's agenda. We have the Financial Revenue Monitoring Report, the Medium-Term Financial Strategy, and Commercialisation Update with Michael Volgate. So, Financial Revenue Monitoring, these are 2 fairly hefty reports, I must admit. There's been quite a lot of interesting reading in there. I have gone through them. I hope members have had the opportunity to go through them over the past week. I think it is extremely important that we do digest these, especially due to the financial circumstances that we're actually under at the moment. It is quite worrying, but at the end of the day, I'm sure Nigel has got a grip of this. And Nigel, I'll hand this over to you now to take over from here. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. If I may, could I just present the report and try to summarise it?
Yes, sorry, not a problem at all. They are quite lengthy reports, so yeah, if you can condense it down, do it the best you can, and we'll throw the questions at you afterwards. Okay,
so the first quarter revenue monitor. Members will be aware that there have been a number of reports to Cabinet already this year about the overall financial position as a result of COVID-19. And those reports have been referred to as the Financial Recovery Plan that's been agreed by Cabinet. This first quarter monitor attempts to extract all the information about COVID and look at the underlying financial position of the Council. So when it starts off by saying in the first quarter monitor, we're forecasting an overspend of £17.7 million across the Council. 13 million of that relates to COVID-19. So the report then concentrates on trying to explain the underlying position of a potential overspend of £4.7 million. Directors are confident that the action that they're taking at the moment will reduce that to about £4.3 million. And there are some centrally controlled underspends that will bring it down further to £3.5 million. But clearly there's still a shortfall there. The main pressures in directorates at the moment are probably across the board in all directorates. Adult social care, if we again strip away all the figures I'll refer to excluding COVID-19 costs. Adult social care at the moment looking at a potential overspend of £1.3 million, primarily around all age disability services. Now, Cabinet agreed in January this year a series of actions to try and recover the position on adult social care around a review of learning disability cases, single-handed approach to home care services, review of daycare provision, and the removal of the maximum care charge. Now, all those are actually being put in place, but because of COVID-19, there have been delays in that because staff have been somewhat occupied with providing services during the pandemic to vulnerable people. So there have been some delays to putting those savings in place, but those savings were meant to address the underlying budget pressures within adult social care, and hopefully once fully implemented in a full financial year will actually bring a more resilient financial position for adult social care. In terms of children's and young people's services, currently forecasting an overspend of around 800,000. As has been previously reported, that's mainly around the challenging position on placement costs for vulnerable children. Again, the Directorate has savings proposals and plans which are in place around commissioning services and youth services in terms of generating savings there, but there's still some significant pressures around, as I say, the looked after children placements. Public Services is currently forecasting an overspend of around 900,000, which is primarily around the transport services in relation to special educational needs children's. Now, again, there were plans in place through recommissioning of services and changes to the transport policies to bring that budget closer to being back in line. But again, those plans have been somewhat delayed or actually need to be reconsidered in light of the new transport arrangements that will need to be put in place for children returning to school. And then finally, in regeneration and strategy, currently forecasting an overspend of £1.4 million, which is a combination of things really. There are some underlying budget pressures that have been around for some time in relation to market services and ISCAL, which will need to be addressed, but also some delays to existing savings plans on things like the introduction of the community infrastructure levy, which will be determined by the local plan when that's implemented. And finally, on regeneration strategy, there's some savings which have been agreed by council, which unfortunately probably cannot be delivered now, which are around the new homes bonus, where the scheme is being scrapped by government. And also we had a savings target around commercial investment income, where there are a couple of changes there. One is the economy has changed significantly, making commercial investment somewhat more risky and less attractive. But also the government has changed is changing the regulations so that local authorities will not be able to borrow to invest in commercial property investment. So that will effectively mean that the council cannot do that in future through borrowing means, and therefore won't be able to generate that saving that it had anticipated. So those are a combination of things there. The way that the Directorate is currently looking at trying to address this is around, when you look at the medium-term financial strategy, there is a significant capital programme that the council has at the moment, mainly funded by capital grants from government. There's opportunities there to look at the way that we charge our costs to those schemes, and officers that would normally be working on revenue schemes could potentially charge to those capital schemes and make the most of that capital funding. So there are opportunities there, but some significant pressures within regeneration and strategy. As I say, that's looking at the moment like an overall financial pressure for the council this year of £3.5 million, which when you look at the financial recovery plan report that's going to Cabinet next week, it talks about some of the additional government funding that hopefully will be coming in through the income compensation scheme, and also through some funding from the CCG in relation to discharges from hospital that have gone into home care services. The recommendations of the report to Cabinet were around implementing the agreed savings as soon as possible, running budget challenge sessions to check progress on the savings plans, and reviewing Directorate reserves to help address the underlying shortfall. And I'll pause there and invite questions if that's okay. Thank you, Chair.
Right, thank you, Nigel. Appreciate that. I have a number of questions. However, I will open this up to members first, because obviously members might actually ask some of the questions that I've got down here in front of me. So, members, it's over to you. you have any questions for Nigel? Councillor Dickinson.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, Nigel. Spent a bit of time reading big chunks of this, and it's the medium-term financial strategy on page 16, the 3-year budget forecasts going forwards. I'm just wondering, what I'm trying to reconcile in my head is the difference between a 3.5 million shortfall this year overall against what looked like.
Yeah, Councillor Dickinson, can I just stop you there a second? We're currently on the revenue monitoring.
Oh, forgive me. Sorry, wrong section. In that case, no, I'll say I'll.
It's fine. Not a problem, because what we'll do is we'll go on to the medium-term financial strategy next. So now,
Forgive me. Sorry about that. I'll come back to that then.
So, any questions on the revenue monitoring? Councillor Ling.
Sorry, wasn't able to unmute myself. Yeah, I was just wondering, you mentioned the negotiation in the report, which I appreciate was written last month. You mentioned the negotiations with the CCG about the discharge, the hospital discharge costs. So my first question is, you know, how much might we be talking about with that, and how have those negotiations gone, really? That was the first thing I wanted to know about. Thank you.
In relation to the discussions with the CCG, I mean, it's been accepted that the council is incurring additional costs as a result of trying to kind of ensure that hospital beds have been available. For the first 3 months of the financial year, a contribution of just over £1 million has been agreed by the CCG, but clearly we'll be continuing those discussions about the additional costs upon the council on an ongoing basis. So that's what's been agreed at this stage, but clearly that takes us into the first up to the first 3 months of the year, and those costs will be continuing, and we will be continuing to have discussions with the CCG about funding.
Okay. Yeah, Councillor Lynn.
Yes. Could I ask another question? I mean, it might be impossible to answer. How does the stage that we're at in terms of implementing this year's budget at the end of that first quarter, because we're only looking at the first quarter, aren't we? How does this compare, if you're able to strip out the COVID-19 effects? How does this compare with the progress that we would be making in terms of trying to implement budget savings and so on in previous years? Because as the report makes clear, we've had to strip out over £100 million in the last 10 years from our budget. And you know, having sat in on these discussions over a number of years, I mean, I haven't gone back and looked at all the papers, but I know that it does change as you go through the year. And you've also had a lot of experience over the years in terms of progress in controlling the different budget headings and trying to make progress with savings. So I suppose just really a question from your perspective, how is it possible to compare this cycle, if you strip out the COVID-19, with where we might have been at the end of the first quarter monitoring previous years? Thanks.
It's probably not an impossible question to answer, but I'd have to look back at the first quarter for last year to try and understand what the projected overspend was at that stage. If I remember correctly, it was actually the projected overspend in the first quarter was greater than £3.5 million at the end of the first quarter last year. And I think it's fair to say the projections in the first quarter are always the most prudent or pessimistic view, because action at this stage can be put in place to try and bring that down. And also people are taking, as I say, a more prudent view. That doesn't mean, however, that we shouldn't be trying to address all these things. But as I say, actions were agreed by Cabinet in January this year. And the main problem has been around the delays to implementing some of those for quite obvious reasons. and the returns that we're now making to government in terms of the implications of COVID. There is a section on that that relates to delayed implementation of savings, and we've been putting on a regular basis figures within that of around £3 million, which we believe is a reasonable estimate of the implication in terms of the delays on savings plans that the council had in the current financial year. Hopefully that will address your the question.
Yes, it does.
But I can certainly look back at last year.
No, it was just to get a sense from you, and you have confirmed that actually, the point about the end of the first quarter is you have still got a way to go down the road when you can actually take some actions and so on. And I note your reference to the government recognising that one of the needs to take into consideration is the difficulty that the pandemic has placed in the way of trying to achieve the savings that we budgeted for back in January or February when we agreed the budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lynn. Sorry about that. That was Councillor Holden trying to get in contact with me. If you heard a lot of noise, it was coming from me. So I don't know whether he's trying to get into the meeting or not. Lauren, Carol, I don't know if you can check, see if Rob's trying to get in. Councillor Porritt.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Really, just with reference, a bit of clarification on a question that Councillor Lynn just asked, in terms of how the government are approaching our negotiations and how we're approaching the negotiations in terms of what we're able to ask for or what we're able to reference with the losses, that because I know there's been a lot of back and forth about what they're willing to accept in terms of COVID related expenses, and obviously you've referenced the delays in implementing savings being able to be part of those negotiations now, which is really heartening to hear. And I just wondered whether we have still got any sticking points with the government in terms of things that we're regarding as COVID related expense or issues, and things that they're not willing to fund.
So far, the government has released various tranches of funding to help local authorities around COVID, and is continuing to ask us to return financial information about the costs on a monthly basis, which across the country we are doing. And obviously that's being monitored to see what the overall cost to local authorities of COVID is. And the funding, as I say, has been released in at least 2 tranches. And the government has also now introduced an income compensation scheme because the losses to the council have not just been in terms of additional costs, but it's also income that we would normally expect to receive, whether that be around sports services or parking and so on. And that a new scheme is being introduced to compensate us at least partly for that. I suppose the element that's largely uncertain at the moment is probably around council tax and business rates losses, where the government at the moment has said that it's too early in the year to know with any great degree of certainty what the losses in terms of council tax and business rates might be to local government, and therefore has said that local authorities can address any shortfalls on business rates and council tax over the next 3 years rather than immediately. Now he's talked about sharing that burden, but it's not clear yet kind of how that's going to be shared out. So you'll see that in the medium-term financial strategy, we're actually having to make some assumptions about how the council tax and business rates losses in the current year will be funded over the next 3 years. The local authorities will no doubt have to fund part of that, but we're not quite sure whether there will be additional government funding to recompense us for at least part of the losses from businesses not being in a position to pay business rates anymore, and similarly council taxpayers either not being able to pay or moving on to council tax reduction scheme So there will be a loss of council tax income and business rates income to local authorities, and that's being very closely monitored. But as I say, at the moment it's uncertain as to how that's being funded, other than it will be spread over the next 3 years.
Thank you, Nigel, on that one. Councillor Naeem, did you put your hand up to speak on this? No. Okay. I don't know whether it's worth. I've got a couple of sort of like questions really that I wanted to ask. Each directorate is obviously responsible for their own finances and how they spend it and what they procure. Now, it was something I was speaking to Lauren about earlier on today. I mean, the staff that we have within certain areas of the authority are very good at what they're doing within their particular role. But when it comes to dealing with the finances that they need to deal with, how much support are they actually given? Because at the end of the day, look at it this way, I wouldn't give a butcher, the ingredients to bake a loaf of bread. So I'd like to know that somebody there who's having to deal with their own finances and got the support from someone in our finance department to ensure that the books, tally at the end of the day, the balance.
Yeah, hopefully, and if you ask the directors, they get support from finance staff on a regular basis. All the finance staff are actually now centralised, have been for a number of years now. So finance support is provided on a consistent basis to every directorate. All the finance staff now report to myself to ensure that there is that consistency and coordination and a general level of hopefully good support to services within every directorate. I think it's probably some years ago now that all the finance staff were brought together. Originally, finance people were within directorates, but in order to get that corporate and coordinated and consistent approach, the finance services were all brought together. So it is provided, as I say, consistently now to all directorates to make sure that they get that level of support that is required. In some cases, if there are particular problem areas, we might be able to flex that resource so that we might put some more resource financial support into particular areas if there's a specific budget pressure there. And that's again one of the advantages of having all the finance staff together, that we can do that and take a risk-based approach to budget support as opposed to a broad brush equal support across the lines. We concentrate on those items, those budgets within the revenue monitor where there are particular risks, whether that's around children's placements, all age disabilities, transport, etc. That's where we need to focus the financial support and hopefully do so.
Appreciate that, Nigel. That's reassuring to actually hear that as well. I think one of the other points I wanted to raise as well, and I don't know if it's not my pertinent to bring it in at this particular point, and that is with regards the 114. Do you actually envisage us having to apply for that at some point? Is it something we could potentially turn around and say, let's apply for it, let's put it into place for a month, and let's improve our financial position as an authority? Is that something that has been discussed yet? Is it something that may happen? And what are the implications if it does happen? I see Councillor Lee, I think Councillor Scullion, I think you've already thought about this by the looks.
Yeah, a Section 114 notice is something that's issued by Chief Finance Officer, Section 151 Officer of the Council, as a last resort if that person doesn't think that the council can balance its books. So it very much is a last resort, and as professionals we'd always hope that actually working together with members and senior officers that we can actually find a way of addressing any particular financial pressures, as opposed to having to go down the lines of a Section 114 notice. And just to put that in context, one authority had a Section 114 notice issued not so long ago, in fact 2 Section 114 notices, but they're very, very few. SIPFA has actually changed the regulations a little, so that actually now we are required to talk to government MHCLG before issuing any Section 114 notices. So as I say, it's very much a last resort. It was referred to in early cabinet reports when COVID-19 first came in. It was again referred to as the last resort. In the latest report that is going to cabinet next week in terms of financial recovery plan, what I'm saying at the moment, what I'm advising at the moment, is that the actions are being taken at the moment to try and ensure that there is a balanced budget for this financial year, and that I don't envisage having to advise for an emergency budget. Clearly that could change if circumstances changed, but at this moment in time I'm advising Cabinet and Council that I don't believe that we need to set an emergency budget, provided the measures that are suggested and recommended within that report. And without going necessarily through that report, it talks about 3 stages in terms of implementing the agreed savings plans, trying to contain costs wherever possible in relation to COVID within the government funding, and then looking at reviewing discretionary services and concentrating on those statutory services that we have to provide to vulnerable people. So provided we put in place those plans, then at the moment I'm not advising that any emergency budget has to be introduced. Clearly that's something that I review on an ongoing basis.
Thank you, Nigel. That's reassuring, is that actually. Councillor Scullion, do you want to come in at this point? I know you're leaving us early tonight, but I think if you want to come in,
I would absolutely endorse what Nigel has said, in that no council wants to move to that extreme position, a position of last resort. That doesn't mean to say that it isn't extremely tough to steady the ship when we're facing such a difficult set of circumstances. And Councillor Dacre going forward will be steering that. And certainly, as Nigel says, at the beginning of COVID, when we quite simply didn't know how long we were going to be on the really strong restrictions of the lockdown of the early period. And we still, at the moment, trying to project forward, because it's not only balancing the books for this year, but looking forward to the next 3 years, of trying to understand and predict when services might recover, when financial income might recover, when do we have things open, when do people feel confident and safe to come back to town centres. And so we have to make some prudent and cautious assumptions going forward. But certainly, as Nigel says, you know, at the time when lots of local authorities were thinking nervously about the future, Section 114 was something that was on everybody's lips. But as Nigel said, the MHCLG, the Ministry for Housing, Communities and Local Government, is very keen that councils enter into dialogue with central government rather than move straight to some sort of Section 114 situation. But there is a lot of water to pass under the bridge in terms of the compensation money from government and understanding the details of that. So this is a point in time. This is the first quarter revenue report. And as Councillor Lynn says, they always look terrible in this first quarter. But to come back to what you said earlier, really, Jenny, that this is the first year in the 4.5 years I've been on the council that the regeneration services were predicting a loss. Some of the things that might have balanced that budget, you know, underspend on winter gritting and so on, cannot necessarily be depended upon to balance the books, which is why we're having to look at a range of actions from directors in terms of really bringing things into control. Thank you, Chair.
okay. Thank you, Councillor Scully. Do we have any more questions from any members before we move on to item 6? No. Okay. Thank you. We shall move on to item 6, which is the medium-term financial strategy report, which was some lengthy reading. So, Nigel, over to you again.
Thank you, Chair. I'll try and keep this as brief as possible in terms of the introduction anyway. The medium-term financial strategy looks forward over the next 3 years in terms of the financial position of the council, and makes some forecasts about, in particular, the revenue savings that might be anticipated over that period. It's something we do at this time of year, every year, and there's always some uncertainty because we don't actually get funding announcements from government for local government until usually December. So there is always that uncertainty, but we usually manage to cope with that through some flexibility. This year, however, the uncertainty is being compounded somewhat by COVID-19, obviously. So that uncertainty is even more than ever. So looking at the position before COVID, I think we probably would have been looking at savings of somewhere between £4 to potentially £7 million at most next year. That'd be a combination of the fact that we already had a savings target of £2 million next year. On top of that, we've got some particular budget pressures that I mentioned in the previous report around transport for special educational needs children, looked after children placements, etc. In addition, there are things like the full year effect of the recently agreed pay award for staff, and also demographic changes. And by that, I mean that the demand for services, in particular within adults and wellbeing, where we actually try to build in to the medium-term financial strategy an amount of money to reflect the fact that there will be an increased demand for adult services in particular. So that would have led to a figure probably of between £4 and £7 million. But as a result of the ongoing impact of COVID that we anticipate, then we're now looking at savings of, in the best case scenario, around £8 million, and in a worst case scenario, around £20 million. What we've assumed as the base case scenario in the medium-term financial strategy is around £15 million. So some quite significant figures there. And the key reasons for that, as I say, are the ongoing impact of COVID, which, for example, we anticipate will have ongoing costs next year in terms of social care, whether that's PPE or demand for services. It will have an ongoing impact upon our income from fees and charges. We don't anticipate that things like parking income, sports income, even when sports facilities are reopened, it will be some time before the income levels restore to the kind of levels that there were pre-COVID. On top of that, we've obviously got things like a loss of council tax, business rates, and we normally within the medium-term financial strategy in previous years, we've assumed a certain level of growth in council tax and business rates. Clearly, that's not going to be the case next year, and we've had to take that into account. In addition to that, there's the increase in council tax reduction scheme claimants, so those people who are not paying the full amount of council tax because of their circumstances. We've seen significant increases in the numbers of people who will move on to that scheme or have moved on to that scheme, which will result in a reduction of council tax income to the council. So that's why at this stage we're saying there's a very wide range of estimates for the level of savings that might be required next year. There is, of course, a question that could be asked which says, well, given that level of uncertainty, why do we set a medium-term financial strategy now rather than waiting for the Chancellor's comprehensive spending review, which is anticipated in the autumn, which I believe could be probably October, November at the earliest, or local government finance settlement in December. But the reason why I advise towards setting a medium-term financial strategy now and starting to think about the budget process for next year is to make the best use of the time that's available between now and next February, when the council has to set a budget and a council tax and a balanced budget for next year, to make best use of that time to think ahead and say, whilst we're not absolutely certain about the level of savings that required, we can at least start to think about what are the options available in terms of delivering those savings through the budget process, and start that process as soon as possible, rather than, as I say, waiting until December when there's greater clarity but very little time to actually produce a balanced budget. And again, I'll pause there and invite questions if that's okay.
So I think on your last note there, funnily enough, I was actually going to suggest that I was going to suggest that we make some sort of a start on it, because I know it's obviously going to be quite timely due to when this is when government are wanting it. But you've covered my question there, to be quite honest, Nigel, on that. So you've obviously read my mind on that. So any questions, members? Right, Councillor Dickinson and Councillor Holden.
Right, apologies for earlier.
All right,
yes, Nigel, the 3-year projections going forwards on the table, I think it was on page 16, look like shortfalls of 13 to 15 million pounds a year, which look a bit scary. Can you offer any comfort in that regard?
I'm not sure I can offer any comfort. Those are our best forecasts in terms of the level of savings that may be required. As I said, there's a great deal of uncertainty about this, but that's our, as I say, best estimate of the level that might be required at the moment. And again, to try and put this in context, we probably would have been looking at £4 to £7 million, but it's the ongoing impact of COVID-19 upon both additional cost to the council and income that's the uncertainty. If we got some announcements about government funding of that, clearly we could refine, and we will refine and update those figures. But as we stand at the moment, those are our best estimates, and that we have to start thinking about a budget process to be able to deliver savings of around those levels.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, scary stuff.
Okay. Councillor Holden.
Thank you, Chair. And could I apologise for my lateness? I dropped my only device that had council emails earlier, so I couldn't get into the meeting. Nigel, there is a school of thought that I mean, there's a lot of plates spinning at the moment. You know, you talked about a decrease in receipts from business rates and possibly from parking, etc. But there is a school of thought that says, you know, we've put up parking charges, we've extended parking charges, which is actually putting some people off going into the towns and shopping and transacting their business, which in turn is having a detrimental impact on the businesses in those towns, which could cause some of those businesses to stop trading, which would then stop the business rates from being paid on those properties. And it is a real plate spinning exercise. I really am not envious of anyone in the administration at this moment in time. You know, and my hat's off to them. You know, they're doing everything they can, but there is a school of thought that says that really what we should be doing is giving some form of financial assistance. Now, whether it's us reducing parking, things like something as simple as parking charges, or reducing or increasing the length of time they get for the same amount of money, but are we looking at everything in the round, you know, when it comes to things like this? Because in one hand, yes, we may get an increase in parking charges, but it's no good if we haven't got as many people coming into the town, going to the businesses, using the businesses, and the businesses fail. you know, in the long term, we end up losing more money than we're actually gaining at one end. So, you know, what's your view on it? I'm interested, and hats off to all the work you've done so far, because I really don't envy your position.
I agree with Councillor Holding's comments there, actually, though.
I suppose all I can say on that is when there are any changes that have financial implications, we try and look at that information in the round to understand whether the implications for other parts of the council or the services or any other aspects of it that will have those implications. So without necessarily referring to that specific example, we always try and understand what the wider implications might be, and whenever reports are produced, try to examine where the evidence is available, what the implications might be, whether that's upon businesses, etc. But clearly it's quite difficult to know what exactly the cause and effect might be of changes like that. But wherever possible, we try and understand what the wider implications of any changes are, just not the direct implications for one particular service or even just the council.
Rob, you're on mute, so I didn't know you were coming back on that one or not.
No, I was just thanking him for his answer, but I you know, it is something that does worry me. You know, I've had numerous residents, and it's all very well for me. Actually, I've got a number of businesses that are out in the sticks. They don't actually have any parking charge. In fact, I don't think we've got any parking charges in Ryburn. But I am speaking to business owners through that I deal with on a day-to-day basis in my business, and one of the key things that they mentioned to me is that they've noticed a distinct drop-off in trades. Now, some of that will be COVID, some of that will be confidence, but you know, if we're doing our best, or we want to do our best to entice these people back out, you know, the government's Eat Out to Help Out schemes finish now. I think we need to seriously be looking at how we can help those businesses in the town centres to continue surviving, you know, and I don't know if we're doing as much as we possibly could, but that's obviously a much wider conversation.
I think one of the things I was thinking of here, sorry, Councillor Scrutiny, I'll let you come in at this point.
Thank you, Chair. I think Councillor Lynn was indicating as well.
I've got Councillor Lynn.
I just wanted to come back on the point that Councillor Holden is making, and of course a number of other people have made. I think it is hard in some ways not to move to one solution, really, to what is really a complex set of problems, really. And I think actually, Rob, you sort of answered that yourself by saying that we have a lot of plates spinning at the moment in terms of calibrating. And you will know as well as I do that some of the problems in the high street, in the retail sector, pre-pandemic, pre-flooding, have actually been due to behaviours, people's behaviours in terms of shopping online, creating this difficulty that we were already addressing, actually. And the question of parking, the question of other support, is a question of the level of council tax and so on. These are all things that we've got to calibrate and balance as a council. And at the same time, we have to manage the amount of money we get from government, the amount of money we get from income and car parking and so on, which is spent on the roads. And we have to basically balance all of these things to meet our statutory duties for children and older people in care. And as you heard earlier from Nigel, those costs are increasing, and particularly at the moment. So we do think about those things just as we think about, you know, on street parking, displacing, paying for that, displacing to other streets. So each decision that we make actually has some sort of knock-on financial impact. And if we don't have an income from here, where does that money come from? What do we cut in order to provide that? But entirely take your point about businesses, and really, we really want to see our local businesses thrive. I'm afraid because of the pandemic, we know already that some businesses will not see out that people's spending patterns will change, unfortunately. But we will really do the very best we can to make sure that businesses thrive.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair.
I'm gonna jump in here, Councillor Lynn. Apologies. I'm only jumping in because it's parking related. And I think you're right, Councillor Scully, and we have to look at a balance of the income that's generated into the authority through parking, but also with the money that's spent into the economy within the town centre as well. And the money that's spent into the economy of the town centre keeps the businesses afloat, which then goes into the business rates that comes back into the authority. Now, one of the things I've thought of really as a parking is that, you know, if we give people the first hour free and then they pay for the second hour, but they pay for the second hour at that point of turning up into the town centre, which then usually allows people that first hour to go off and do what they need to do, knowing full well that they've actually got a second hour in the parking where they can actually go then spend it by going and having a coffee and relaxing and doing something else in the town centre, which means then they've got time to spend that little bit more income in the town, and we still get the income from that parking for that hour that they've been there, even though they've been there too. So that's just a suggestion, and maybe something, I don't know whether it's worth a recommendation that to Cabinet, that they actually look at something like that to help both sides, to ensure we get generation from income for people going into town, parking, but from the businesses as well. Now I can see you both want to come in on that one, Councillor Scullion and Councillor Dacre. So Councillor Scullion, I'll let you.
So you've been very generous, Chair, because I'm afraid I have to go at 7. Of course, the Cabinet have looked at all the permutations of car parking and lots of discussions with businesses in the different market towns. One of the problems of giving a period free, traders tell us, is that often people come in, do their bit of business within the free hour and don't stay. And that, you know, they come to go to the doctors, but you know, so swings and roundabouts on that. We have looked at a number of permutations and we are still doing so. But don't forget, we've got also our climate change policy in terms of, I know it's very difficult at the moment, trying to persuade people where they can to take the bus, to cycle, etc. And we have to think not just about the pandemic, the longer term. But I agree, the immediate thing that we're facing at the moment is very, very difficult, really. But once again, the challenge has to go back. If the council doesn't have income from government settlement, if it doesn't, you know, if business rates are going down, etc., where does it get its income from? And perhaps I could finish by just saying one thing that would help Calderdale tremendously is building new houses. Because with the question of, as Nigel said, that the previous new homes bonus, the community infrastructure level levy, section 106 and so on. And of course, people living in the borough, shopping, you know, filling the schools, you know, bringing money in. If the borough does not grow, if we don't have houses for families to grow and people to move into the borough, which I hope they will do, if they're fed up being in city centre flats and Leeds during pandemic, come and live in Calderdale. So one of the things that plates we need to spin is, how do we get the right kind of responsible housing growth in the borough? Because that's a component of the financial situation. Thank you.
Okay. I'm going to go, Councillor, I'm going to go to Councillor Dacre because I think she might have something to add to what we were just saying, and then I'll definitely come to you. I've not forgot you, don't worry.
No, thank you, Chair, but you're wrong. I don't. Councillor Scullion beat me to it.
All right, okay. Councillor Lynn, it's over to you.
Right, okay, well, now that I've got the floor, I can't resist making a comment about the previous discussion before I move on to my question, which relates to the capital programme, Nigel, just so you, or the relationship between capital programme and revenue. But my comment is quite simply, I mean, I was in Halifax today, and I went to the fishmongers. I've never bought fish from a supermarket. I don't intend to start. We've got wonderful fishmongers in Halifax. And I said to him, how's trade? And he said, well, it's all right. But he said, people are still scared. He said, I had a customer came in today and she said she just was scared of coming into town. She said this was the first time she'd been in town since the end of January. And I do think that that's part and parcel of what's going on, and I think we need to recognise that. But on a more positive note, I've also read in the papers, I'm sure other people have, that actually not only are some people beginning to think that maybe they don't want to live in the middle of Manchester or they don't want to live in the middle of Leeds, they might actually like to live somewhere civilized like Calderdale. And the other thing is that apparently retail habits, although the kind of everybody's been doing the online shopping, well, everybody except me, there's a lot of people who actually are discovering the benefits of their local corner shops and their local shops alternatives. So who's to say what the trends are? I think it'll be up and down. Anyway, that's enough of that. My question to Nigel is, when you talk about, I mean, obviously the report is structured in that you're in two parts, really, as I understand it, and you've got the detail and a good amount of detail really about our capital programme, and then obviously the key pressures that we face in relation to the revenue programme. And of course the capital programme in the main, we've got 100 million capital programme that we're running, fantastic, doing some really, really good things, including the LED street lights, which I was very pleased to have had a little part in a few years ago. But I wanted to know to what extent it would assist our revenue programme if we actually were a bit less ambitious in terms of our capital programme, because part of the way in which we fund the capital programme is through prudential borrowing. Obviously, I know that's investor save, like the LED streetlights and so on. And there's also sometimes we have to pull in money from revenue and reserves, and then also capital receipts, which is where we're trying to bring in money from things that we sell off. But I mean, we must have sold off so much of the family silver. I don't know whether there's anything left to sell, really. So I just wondered if you could say a little bit about whether there's what are the sort of factors that the cabinet and this council needs to be thinking about when considering how much of a capital programme it should be running, and what are the costs associated with that, notwithstanding the fact that a lot of the big capital programmes are funded from government funding, but still we're sometimes having to put money towards it as well. Thanks.
Good point, that, Jenny.
Okay, you're absolutely right in that in terms of the capital programme, it's quite a significant one with just over £100 million planned spend over the next 3 years. Interestingly, 2/3 of that is actually financed by various forms of grants, whether those be government grants through the combined authority or whatever. So we effectively have no impact upon the revenue budget. They are fully funded by government grants. The remainder of the vast majority of the remainder of the capital programme is funded by prudential borrowing. Now, clearly that does have a revenue implication for the council because of the fact that that borrowing has to be repaid with interest. But again, the majority of the prudential borrowing that's been agreed by council is on whether you call it an investor save basis, but where the savings from that investment will actually pay for the cost of borrowing that money. So in terms of the street lighting replacement programme, the savings from energy costs and maintenance will pay for the cost of borrowing that £20 million to fund replacements of the street lighting, notwithstanding all the additional environmental benefits, etc. So the majority of the prudential borrowing that the council approves is on, as I say, an investor save basis where the savings will actually pay for the borrowing. That's not always the case, and when it is the case that has some revenue implications, we're very clear to council that actually this might be done for other reasons rather than investor save, because it's actually something that's a priority for the council and will give benefits that aren't necessarily financial in terms of regeneration, etc. But as I say, the vast majority of the prudential borrowing that's been agreed by the council should be paid for through the savings that are generated by that investment. So without the investment, you wouldn't actually have the savings to be able to pay for it. So, and the amount that's actually funded through revenue, if you look at that, is what, £1 million out of £101 million over the next 3 years. So clearly a very small percentage that has a direct revenue implication for the council and an impact upon council tax.
Okay. Councillor Dacre, do you want to come in at this point as well?
Yes, thank you, Chair. It was just to say that if you note on page 12 of the report, Nigel also comments that if this, if the government grant isn't spent by us, then that money is lost to the local economy. So there is another positive benefit in spending that part of the capital programme, money coming in from outside into Calderdale.
Okay, and that's the 67.4 million, is it?
The external funding, yes.
Okay. Councillor Naeem, and then what, Councillor Holden and then Councillor Hutchinson.
Yeah, thanks all. I think it's important to understand the fact that anything that we look at in terms of making savings and really responding to the current crisis, that we were actually sort of responding to a lot of other things prior to COVID-19. And you talked about parking, for example. And I think Councillor Scullion, before she left, she talked about the fact that, you know, we were trying to sort of look at it environmentally in terms of stopping or trying to get people not to sort of take cars into the town centre and allowing people to sort of breathe properly in that sense. And to be honest with you, I was against the sort of the parking charges in my sort of group. I thought that it was the wrong decision. But however, I've been proved wrong because I've walked around in town, and I haven't seen any difference. Number of people that actually go there, to town hasn't actually diminished in any way. And it has, and the parking charges hasn't actually sort of affected that in a great way. But I think other people have sort of said it's because of the fear of COVID-19 that people are actually sort of keeping away at the moment, and it's nothing to do with parking in that sense. So parking is just one example, I think, Chair, when we're talking about sort of looking at how we can respond to the current pandemic, because there are other issues that we need to look at, whether it's our capital program, that because we had in our thinking. And I think the Cabinet has actually sort of thought about it. Every report I've seen in terms of our financial situation, and hats off to them, they've considered everything. Under the sort of strenuous circumstances, they've gone through each and every detail of what they can do and responding to that. I think sometimes people forget the fact that we were, this council was being run before COVID, and we were under pressure before that. And I think we just sort of now responding to those kind of sort of things. So sometimes some of the things, they will actually marry with the current sort of strategy that we've got, and the impact they will impact on the other things that we were working on. And going back to parking, of course, it will have a double effect. We might or might not make savings, but we will also sort of have an effect in terms of reducing the number of people using cars in town. And I'm sure there are other examples in that respect. But I just wanted to sort of say overall, I think in terms of the financial situation, every time I think Nigel has actually come on board with us, and having read the papers, spoken to people, and sort of, we're all concerned about what's happening. But I just sort of think there's been a hell of a lot of work behind the scenes, and I'm really pleased. I'm sure as an elected member that everything that's being done is actually going to benefit, hopefully, in the long run.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Naeem. Councillor Dacre, did you want to respond to that? I've seen you put a message in the chat box.
No, my query was just that Lauren had said Councillor Dacre, please chair, and I was a bit puzzled by that because I thought you...
All right, no, no problem. Councillor Holden?
Actually, my point was covered by Councillor Lynn earlier, so I'll step back.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Hutchinson?
Thank you, Chair. Returning to Councillor Scullion's point that what we need is more people actually living within the borough, and in particular, more people living within Halifax town centre, which would increase the footfall for local businesses as well as council tax receipts. Is there anything that we can do as a local authority in the medium term to actually stimulate the development of living accommodation within Halifax town centre to try and achieve those measures.
Might be a change of planning policies, I think, to do that, but I think.
Well, there's permitted development, which allows an awful lot to be done.
Yeah.
But I do believe that there has been talk of increasing the ability of people to live within Halifax town centre. Several areas that would seem very appropriate for that. I was just wondering what leeway we have in terms of actually stimulating that.
I don't know if anyone can answer that. Councillor Dakin, you want to?
Well, I don't know if Nigel had anything to say about that, but the problem, I suppose, is that any permitted development is going to have to be done by private developers. It's not something that the council you'd initially expect to get involved in that. So it will be a case of working with those private developers. Now, that's not to say that you can't do it, and you do that partly by making private developers aware that Halifax or Calderdale is an area that people want to come and live in. And if they start seeing the demand, they will start wanting to build, because that's exactly what has happened in Manchester. There were a few groundbreaking regeneration schemes where old mills were tarted up and people moved in. And then before you know where you are, skyscrapers are going up everywhere, because developers have realised that this is somewhere that people are going to want to come and buy a flat, whether it's to live in all the time or living during the week. So I think it's part of it, you would hope would come from the council's work that it's doing to try to make Calderdale a place that people want to come and live and have a better life. And as I say, you would hope that private development would then follow on from that.
It's a bit of a chicken and the egg situation, isn't it, really? Do we try and improve businesses to make it inviting for developers to build residential properties, or do we try and get residential properties first to prop up the businesses? It's a difficult one to do. I don't know if Nigel, if you want to come back on this at all, should we go on to council?
No, I think Councillor Dacre's considered the main issue, which is the council working with private developers to try and encourage them to do that development, across the borough. In terms of what the council can do directly, I mean, the council obviously has its own development company, so that might be something that can have a look at. But that's something that probably is relatively small scale compared with the main issue is about trying to encourage private developers to come in whether that's through planning policy or other ways of working with those developers. But it is primarily about trying to encourage them to come in. I can't add much more to that.
Interesting thought. You mentioned our development company, the Weave Development Company. And there's a possibility there that we could potentially look at any council-owned buildings within the town centre for us to start that ball rolling by turning them into residential. And at least it's a start. We've set that precedence then in the town centre, which then should make it easier then for developers to come along and do it, because we've done it for ourselves first. Councillor Lynn, you want to come in?
Thank you very much for letting me in again, Chair. I just wanted to turn to the final section of the report, the sensitivity analysis on page 22, which I think is really, really good and really clear, because it actually looks at, it sets out a number of the factors that really could affect whether we get whether it's a best case scenario or a worst case scenario. And I know that you've talked down there at one point about political considerations, devolution, Brexit, and so on. And I suppose to that we could add, and in fact it probably is in there somewhere, I just couldn't find it, I was looking for it a minute ago. I know that having been involved in discussions on behalf of the council with the Metropolitan SEGOMA, the Metropolitan Authorities finance body under the LGA, for a number of years, there's been a constant sort of moving back and moving back and moving back of the changes to how government finance is going to be going into local government, and the gain sharing and all the rest of it, and also the fair funding for schools and what that's actually going to mean. So, but the one of the things that is mentioned, but not drawn out on, and we had a discussion about it, you know, earlier on in yesterday at Cabinet, of course, is this question about the mayor, and the mayor for West Yorkshire, and if that is approved by all the constituent authorities, that there will be a certain amount of gain share funding coming through from that. And previous iterations of the mayor for West Yorkshire, it involved that most of the money came to West Yorkshire in the form of funding for capital projects, but it appears that there might now be some opportunities for revenue. And I just wondered, it's crystal ball gazing really, but is any of that, I mean, by the time we come to be setting our budget, actually next February, hopefully we will know whether or not we're going to be getting a mayoral authority for West Yorkshire, and whether or not any of the constituent authorities within West Yorkshire are going to get anything out of it or not. But I just wondered whether, I know it's not the cavalry riding over the horizon, but I'm just trying to kind of clutch at straws really to see whether those political considerations might actually, you know, provide some grounds for hope in future years.
I think Nigel, at this point, because we've gone through the capital part of the report, haven't we? And then I think we stopped Geneva before we went on to the revenue side of the report. Did you still have the revenue part to finish off, Nigel? Which is what?
No, I think I'd covered as much as I want. I mean, I'd say I'd happily take questions on any parts of the strategy, if that's okay, rather than going through it. As you say, you've had the opportunity to read it, even if it is a lengthy document. So I'd rather just take questions if that's okay.
Yeah, no, that's fine, absolutely fine with me. I just didn't know whether you wanted to sort of like finish it off. So I know we sort of like cut you off at one point there and went on to questions, but yeah, if you can answer Councillor Lynn's question, that'd be great. Then we'll go carry on with questions.
I think it's fair to say, yes, there are going to be hopefully some opportunities, including some financial gain share from the devolution deal. At the moment, we haven't built that into the medium-term financial strategy. And I think if there is a gain share, it's unlikely to be in the next financial year. So it is something that as soon as there is some clarity about that, and we can anticipate something, then we'll start to build it into this strategy. And it's one thing that, yes, clearly it'll hopefully improve the scenarios in here. But at this stage, we haven't tried to make any assumptions about how much financial benefit might arise to Calderdale from that. But again, it's part of these regular updates we'll do on the medium-term financial plan, and just say, okay, when we get that certainty about any element of it, we update the figures and advise councillors accordingly.
Thank you, Nigel. Do we have any more questions? I think we've covered quite a lot. Councillor Porritt.
To be fair, it's not really a question. It's more of a comment, and I really wanted to collect the questions, everything out of the way. I just want to thank Nigel and his team, having read this report, to read a sentence like, currently the impact of Brexit has not been quantified because we're dealing with a pandemic. The levels of uncertainty that you're being asked to work within are mind-boggling. The idea that you're juggling something as life-changing as Brexit alongside a pandemic, alongside the shifting sands of government and uncertainty around where the money might be coming from or not, to be able to keep a cool head and just to produce such a thorough piece of work under those circumstances, I just think is a remarkable thing to have done. And yeah, I just wanted to put it on there, and just to thank you for your continued dedication to trying to drag us through these incredibly difficult times.
I have to agree. I have to mirror Councillor Porritt's comments there. I really do. Take my hat off to you and your team, Nigel. Having read this report, it's there is a lot there, a lot of work gone into this. So we do appreciate that. One of the things I'm looking at here on page 26, which is the third paragraph up, which is for the above reasons, the risk assessment in section 5 highlights the main uncertainties of the council budget. The most significant of these are considered to be the upcoming spending review, the rising cost of care, and the ongoing impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, and the future fair funding review. Where possible, a sensitive analysis attempts to model the extent of those risks, giving upside and downside variations to the council central forecast. I'm actually wondering if it's possible that, well, it's worth us as a scrutiny board having a look at these first before they actually go to cabinet, just to see if we can actually make any recommendations first before they go to cabinet. Is that something, Lauren, you can maybe come in at on this, do you think?
Sorry, Chair, I just missed that in bit then with the chat going. Can you just say that last bit again with regards to cabinet?
Yeah, it's with regard, or on page 26, the third paragraph up, with regards the upcoming spending review, the rising cost of care, and the ongoing impact of the COVID-19 pandemic and the future fair funding review. I was wondering if it's worth us having a look as a strategy and performance scrutiny board at these first before they actually go to cabinet.
Yeah, I mean, I'm more than happy to build something into the work programme, or we could look at doing it as a piece of detailed work outside of the meeting and bring it back. I can work with Nigel. I mean, Nigel will probably be best to talk about timelines and things like that. But yeah, that's something we could build in, no problem.
Just in case there's any sort of like suggestions we can come up with or recommendations from them maybe before they actually go to cabinet, and then it'd probably save a bit of time as well. Nigel, you want to?
Just a point of clarification on that. I mean, the medium-term financial strategy is going to cabinet next Monday. Now, the medium-term financial strategy is then referred to council. It is a council decision on the medium-term financial strategy. So, whilst clearly it's not possible to have another look at this document prior to going to cabinet, then it will be going to council, to full council in, right, I think it's November. So there's either an opportunity there to discuss it or to consider it again before it's referred to council, if you wish.
Okay, Councillor Lynn.
Yes, I mean, I fully take on board your wish, Chair, to kind of do what we can to support the process. But I think that in a way that's partly why Cabinet wanted us to take a look at it before it went to Cabinet on next week, which I think, you know, we've tried to do as best we can. And I mean, I know I was the one when we were setting our work programme at the beginning of the municipal year that said we need to leave some time in it to kind of come back and do a bit of extra work around finance, because it is going to be really difficult. But I would have thought that at the moment, it's been great having had a look at being able to have a look at this report ahead of Cabinet, which has been fantastic, and absolutely totally echo everything that Councillor Porritt said about appreciating the work that's gone into it. I would have thought the time when we might want to look at this again would be later on in the autumn, or possibly even after we've adopted the MTFS, because it's really hard until we've got a bit more clarity about what the government is going to be saying, what the Chancellor's going to be saying. Certainly, at the very least, the autumn we've got a sense about the autumn statement. And I think it's after that, I think that when Nigel and colleagues will be able to provide us with a bit more, they'll be able to adjust some of the assumptions and so on, and then perhaps we can have a look at it. Because there's no doubt about it that, and there's a lot of discussion about it at the moment in the press and in the news agenda, really, about the balance likely to be struck between tax increases and departmental cuts and all the rest of it. And at the moment, I think I'm satisfied that we've done our best to look at this before it goes to Cabinet, and I think the time to look at it again will be a little bit later on, perhaps November, December.
Right, okay, yeah.
That would be my suggestion.
No, I think November's probably a reasonable time to have a look at that. Councillor Dacre?
Yes, just to say that that does give you the opportunity both to have we hope, more information and some more certainty, but it's also before could just about be before the formal consultation for the budget. So you would potentially have some time before that formal process opens.
Yeah. Okay. I think that's fair then. I'm happy with that we'll get the chance to have a look at that before then. Okay. Right, if there's no more questions on the medium-term financial strategy, we'll move on to item 7, which is a commercialisation update. Are we all okay to move on? Yeah. Thank you, Nigel. Really appreciate your time. You're welcome to stay for this last one if you want to. Or if you want to go, it's up to you. Right. Michael and Helen, it's over to you then for the commercialisation update.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks also for the invitation to give this verbal update on our commercialisation progress. As you say, I'm joined this evening by my colleague Helen Pilling. Helen was appointed commercialisation intern in June 2019 on the recommendation of the Scrutiny review to increase capacity to drive progress in our commercialisation agenda. Helen's been a fantastic addition to the team, and we've extended the post for 12 months to give us a chance to future-proof the role to maintain the momentum that we've had so far. As we know, and as we've heard, the increasingly challenging financial position for the council makes being enterprising more important than ever. And we've been working closely with managers, heads of service and directors to help services learn from experiences during COVID and implement new ways of working, to reshape the way that services are delivered, and to review service business plans to reflect the challenging economic climate, maximise social value, and to explore and pursue income generation opportunities. And what this means is that our statutory services need to understand how they can deliver outcomes in different ways, by delivering what's needed to discharge the duty most efficiently and explore options on alternative methods. Our discretionary services need to review how they operate in future council by identifying funding sources and robustly evidencing impact of social value, and by exploring whether these discretionary services can be traded and considering alternative delivery options. And our traded services need to understand changes in demand and opportunities, and they must have approved business plans with full cost recovery, meeting customer need, and explore further income generation opportunities. We're currently supporting services across the council to revisit the business plans and embed these principles. And a good example is the work Helen's been doing with the museums team at Shibden Hall, supporting them with their business planning. I don't know, Helen, if you want to say a few words on your work with the museum service.
Hi there, sorry, a bit of technical difficulty. Thanks, Michael. So the museum service identified a commercial opportunity whilst experiencing the effect of Gentleman Jack on visitor numbers at Shibden Hall last year. Visitor numbers increased by 300% compared to previous years, totalling approximately 60,000 visitors in 2019-20 compared to a previous annual average of 20,000. The commercial opportunity recognised was to take advantage of this interest to generate further income, which could then be reinvested in the service to meet customer need. The admissions charging structure was reviewed and prices were increased in accordance with local and national competitors. As a result, approximately £36,000 additional income was generated and reinvested in improvements to the hall to safeguard and enhance the visitor experience.
Thanks, Helen. Indeed, in our work with services, a number of opportunities have been identified post-COVID for things like efficiencies through working remotely, co-production with local organisations, a shift from paper and print to digital, opportunities through e-commerce for merchandise and product sales, and a shift from face-to-face to virtual delivery. And this last point prompted a review of cashless payments and booking systems, which Helen's been working on.
Thanks, Michael. The impact of COVID on council customer payments has increased the demand for cashless payment options to be available. So we're supporting services in developing online payments and card machine payment methods. During conversations with services, a staff suggestion identified an online booking system would further meet user need and support accessibility to services online. As a result, this possibility is being explored at the same time as online payment systems to streamline and source a council-wide solution. And we're expecting this work to have a substantial impact.
As Helen mentioned, one of the staff suggestions, and during COVID, our staff suggestion scheme for commercialisation has produced lots of ideas, including developing an in-house translation and signing service, which is currently outsourced outside the borough, setting up a pool of council consultants through the HR recruitment service to support casual opportunities in services. There's been an idea for a community allotment at Manor Heath, recruiting cultural ambassadors, developing a cultural passport for Calderdale, which builds nicely on the golden ticket, which was proposed the last time we came to Scrutiny. And there are also various opportunities being explored by transport services, and also a need has been identified for virtual training facilitation skills. And this has been developed and will be traded and delivered by Tim Fagan and the staff at the Victoria Theatre. And whilst I'm on the subject of training, since our last update, Helen and I, supported by the council's commercialisation mentors, have facilitated the commercialisation training programme, which included workshops on an introduction to commercialisation for elected members and staff, commercial awareness, and several service-specific workshops on business planning, functional analysis, market research, and understanding customers. Post-COVID, our new programme of virtual commercialisation training will be a virtual induction for staff, manager training, which is a series of 4 workshops responding to the manager's skills audit, elected member virtual workshops, and we've also trialled and delivered defining social value, and our public sector sales training, which we've piloted face-to-face and we're now developing virtually. So in conclusion, there are a great many opportunities for different ways of working, which we're actively supporting services to pursue in Vision 2024 and the Enterprising Council. That, Chair, is our verbal update on commercialisation progress, and we'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Helen. That's absolutely fantastic. Some great things there that's taking place by the sound of it. Some fantastic things. And this is something that's close to my heart anyway, because obviously myself, and I think it was Councillor Mike Payne at the time, that we really sort of like pushed to get the commercialisation scheme up again, along with the Scrutiny board as well at the time. Just a quick one with regards the financial impact that you're having on here. I mean, obviously you said there's been another 300,000 additional income from the Shiggin Hall, which is absolutely fantastic. What other income have you seen actually coming in from other ideas? Do you have any figures?
I don't have any figures, Chair, but one of our main focuses has been to look at how services can operate differently. And the savings and the budget pressures, which Nigel mentioned earlier, will all be in part of their service business planning. So it's really getting services to think more creatively about how they can discharge the statutory duty, and not necessarily focusing on the discretionary duties unless they can actually demonstrate a robust social value impact and they can identify that funding is secure to deliver those discretionary duties. The traded elements, we're carrying out a robust business planning exercise just to make sure that it is going to reflect on the council's core business, that we're not unnecessarily competing with local business, and that it is delivering customer need. And we're finding that this whole service approach and whole directorate approach is starting to change the culture now quite positively.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Any questions, members? Councillor Lynn? Councillor Dacre wants to come in. Councillor Lynn?
Yes, thank you both for those reports. That was really interesting. And I was very struck by Helen's reference to the work that's been going on at Shibden Hall following the the sort of success of the Gentleman Jack and all the other things, really. And I guess, I mean, that's the tragic thing in a way, is that the pandemic has put paid to an awful lot of the increase in tourist income that we might have reasonably expected from that. But I'm sure that as things roll down the track, we would hope that, especially if people decide that they're not going to risk flying in a tin box and getting COVID-19 and they're going to stay in the UK for their holidays, then I'm sure a lot more people are going to be wanting to come here. So I just wondered to what extent you think that generating money from visitors, from the visitor economy, is a key part of what we're going to be able to do, going down the track in years to come.
Yes, thank you, Councillor. I think it's a huge part, and I think the ideas that our tourism manager and our cultural services manager are discussing at the moment, particularly around the cultural passport, the access to virtual facilities rather than physical facilities, and the interest that we're having in developing e-commerce for the sale of merchandise and memorabilia, particularly through the museums and the library service, are really encouraging. I think if the kind of a co-production can be looked at with like the Peace Hall, local organisations, local arts and cultural organisations, that the council is kind of facilitating that co-production of a borough-wide offer for visitors. I think that will be really attractive. And I think certainly with the Gentleman Jack impact that Helen mentioned, I think the borough is in a really good place when we start opening up a little bit more. And I think there are vast opportunities, Councillor.
I think we're due for a second series, aren't we, of Gentleman Jack? Is that in the pipeline? If that goes ahead and the timing right, I think we could be well under the way for another influx of tourism into Calderdale, and it's that we need to certainly embrace, because we know how well it's done after the first series. We need to make the most of it again, definitely, and incorporate the Peace Hall. Yeah. Councillor Dacre, do you want to come in on this as well?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I did go to your training, I think last year, on commercial enterprise, and I'm sorry if you said it at the beginning of this meeting or your presentation now and I missed it, but there are, apart from not having to obviously have regard to the council's core functions and not interfering with other local businesses, you are limited anyway in how much money how much profit you can make, aren't you? There are quite strict limits about how that can work. So you cannot be entrepreneurial in the traditional sense of perhaps just trying to make as much money as possible. I think you can't do that, can you?
No, you're absolutely right, Councillor. And under the Local Government Act, we are only permitted to cover our costs to ensure that our services, if they are trading, achieve full cost recovery, which through our business planning, we can evidence that. If we do want to make a profit, we can put opportunities through Calderdale 1 Limited, which is the council's wholly owned trading company, which when we are in a better place post-COVID, we will be looking to explore opportunities around Calderdale 1 Limited. But at the moment, we are ensuring that services just achieve full cost recovery and they're not subsidised through any other means. You're absolutely right.
Thank you, Councillor Decker. Any more questions, members? No, okay. Just a quick one then. On the golden ticket that you mentioned. What does the golden ticket cover? What does that get people?
Well, at the moment, Chair, the tourism manager and the cultural services manager are exploring this. So it would be access to a variety of arts and cultural offers. And I think their approach will be that they go out to businesses and partner organisations to see who wants to be involved. It's very much in the early stages because it did literally come in. I think it was last week, Helen, wasn't it? Through the staff suggestion scheme. Yeah. But I think it's certainly got that germ of a good idea because it opens itself up to advertising, to sponsorship, to this co-production with local businesses. And it could be something that's really attractive. I suppose it's similar to the sport offer that's on at the moment, but this is looking at culture in the first instance, and of course it could be broadened to include a whole host of subscription benefits. So I'd like to update yourselves when we have a little bit more information on that, if possible.
Definitely. I mean, the golden ticket, I mean, I've thought about this before as well, whether it's an ideal thing to push onto the tourism of Calderdale. You know, you receive a one-night stay in one of our hotels, a meal at one of the restaurants, an entrance to a number of our, you know, attractions like Shooting Hall and Bankfield Museum and things like that. So, you know, yeah, I like that idea. I really, really do. If we've no more questions, members? No, thank you very much, Michael and Ellen. Really appreciate that. It's great stuff that's happening there, and look forward to catching up with you both again soon. Thank you.
Thank you for the invitation. Thank you.
Very welcome. You're very welcome. Okay. I see members are starting to look tired. I think we've had a long week this week, to be quite honest. So we'll get on with quickly go through our work programme and then call it a night.
I'll keep it nice and brief. Just to say that obviously we've had this additional meeting and we've also got one next week, which is our original one on the 9th. That's all planned in, but the work programme was probably out of date for those meetings now. We've had to do some reshuffling just in terms of the finance items. So I've sent an updated version to members. And if there's any amends or suggestions following that, I'm more than happy to make them either tonight or next week, or if you just want to drop me an email too, that's fine.
Okay. I think we can look at. I'm happy to look at that next week.
Lovely.
Everybody else, I think everybody else is in agreement with that.
Ready for a coffee.
No, thank you everybody. Thank you members. I mean, it has been a tough week, I think, for us all. George, you've had 2 scrutiny meetings as well this week. And we've had the full council in between, so well done everybody, and thank you, and see you all soon.